welcome to another episode of the Reverse Mentor Lab,
where we engage with thinkers from around the world to explore how leaders of today can learn from leaders of tomorrow.
You're back with your hosts. I'm Joshua.
And I'm Jan. Today's guest is digital marketing strategist. He's experienced design director, facilitator, content producer, podcast producer, and host. Please welcome the experienced thinker, Werner Puchert. Hello, Werner. Welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on our podcast. And of course, hey, Joshua, welcome back.
Yeah.
How are you guys?
Excellent to be I'm just gonna there was jokes before the show started that I speak too much. I'm just gonna I'm gonna go with the flow. I'm gonna stick with the script and just talk right over Joshua and then say thanks for having me. Thanks. I kind of know you guys from other activities, and huge honor to be on this side of your adventures in the land of exploring new opportunities. So thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Werner, right back at you, man. Thanks for the time. And I don't know if Jens is ready for the South African duo to take on the German inside of a podcast setting. But it's great to have you here on another episode of the Reverse Mentor Lab, where we connect, and explore different ideas, different ways of thinking, cross-generational learning, and also just go down some rabbit holes and just have a conversation. So I think, we've sort of set up a broad theme to chat about today, and that broad theme is design, and more specifically around life lessons from design. And then a trigger that I've sort of put on the end of this for Werner is because it's linked to a conversation that we had a few months back around bringing back overused terms. And I think that Werner spent many years inside of the design thinking ecosystem. He's worked with many different businesses, many different teams with different forms of design as well. And I know that he's got some threads that he wants to pull in terms of those overused terms. But maybe, Werner, to kick off the discussion today, tell us a bit about yourself for those who don't know you. What's your story?
Okay, so this is a long story, so I'm going to keep it short. The long story short is that I'm a South African, as Joshua mentioned, but I currently reside in Warsaw, Poland with my lovely Polish wife. I came to Poland at some stage to do a talk about user experience design because that is kind of my background. And then I met this wonderful lady, and since then I've been here. Kind of reversing out of that, my career took a turn in management consulting, where I helped set up with other people, of course, 2 Deloitte Digitals, one in South Africa and then one in Warsaw, Poland, which was super exciting in itself for Eastern Europe. And then before that, and this is the thing that I don't get to talk a lot about, is the fact that I spent years, probably the bulk of my career, in advertising. And sometimes people have this negative connotation when it comes to advertising, but those were, up until this point, the most exciting times of my life. So it's kind of a little bit of a broad background of myself. Before that, though, I also spent some time in publishing. So I worked in a real editorial office where we dropped newspapers, stop the press kind of stuff. And that was also something that shaped me a little bit. And I think each one of those little elements kind of built into what I'm doing today, which is kind of being an independent entrepreneur, consultant, and then focusing on making the design space also interesting. We want to design experiences for other people, but I also believe the experience of doing design should be designed in a way. So kind of inception thing. So that's what I'm focusing on currently.
Maybe just to add one thing, which I don't know why you're not telling that part of your life. You have been a professional paintball player.
Oh, yeah. That's why, yeah, that's true, right? Because a lot of people say, why is this old guy doing all this crazy stuff? Because this old guy spent the bulk of his young adulthood playing paintball internationally. And that's kind of the joke, is that I never left the borders of South Africa until I was around older than 21 years old, which is kind of crazy when I think about now living in Europe, that people travel so freely, when they're young. I never left the borders until I hit the age of 21. And I left the borders of South Africa because I was playing international paintball. And I got my exposure to the world through the lens of this kind of speedball sport. And I played for 15 years. We managed, so the pinnacle of my paintball career was that we won the Malaysian World Cup. And we beat Iran to get that trophy. So it's such a crazy story to tell, but yeah, definitely something that shaped me a lot.
Yeah, I'm just saying it because we are not a non-business podcast, but kind of linking to business a lot, but I just love that part of your story. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, and the thing is also like the reason I shared it with you back in the day is because it's kind of related to screw ups I've made, and it was because of paintball and my passion for paintball that I started my first real business. If I look at my career, I mean, of course, in management consulting, you kind of, and that's what people don't always realize about the big firms, is that you're actually running a small business within a big business. That's what the big difference is when you work in a firm, is that ultimately the partners are, or you work with a partner. I mean, I wasn't a partner, I was like a senior manager or something. And, but ultimately what you're doing is you're running a business within a business, right? It's like this little ecosystem. And that's also what drove me to actually start my own business again after leaving the firm. And when I was confident to do that. But actually, when I think about my past, when I started playing paintball, I was so passionate about the sport. I wanted to make a living out of it. And that's when I started doing my first real small business, which was related to media and advertising and that kind of stuff within the sport in South Africa. So it's, yeah, I think all the experiences kind of shape you, right? And you have to kind of cling to it. And you're right, Jens, you have to kind of think about that and also mention that is the background, right? It's not always like in an interview, you go like, so I played paintball for 15 years. What were you doing? Shooting people?
Yes, you did.
Well, I'm kind of like assuming that you think it was really good. I mean, I got shot a lot. So
So maybe just double clicking on the word paintball quickly, Werner, and obviously you've got vast experience outside of, you know, just the paintball arena, but I just want to create a scenario quickly. So when we go to a paintball range, sometimes we just rock up and we think about playing paintball. But how, from someone who was an expert, who was a professional inside of that space, do you think that those lessons that you maybe gained from the experience of playing paintball influenced some of your design thinking?
yeah, I mean, like one of the first things that continuously jumps to mind when you even mention the word paintball, and I think it's even to this day is a challenge for a lot of people, is positioning, right? And branding. Because for you, when you think about paintball, you probably think about a brown overall, people who kind of do, you know, these preppers who hide in holes and then they kind of wait for some government to topple and then they're going to come out and take over the capital kind of stuff. And I remember when we started playing paintball and I started getting serious about it, we started realizing that there's this really kind of high tech, because so here's the thing. We never spoke about guns because we didn't want to be associated with the militia. We spoke about mockers. We spoke about strategy. We spoke about, you know, energy, practice, you know, training, because that was what we wanted to do. We weren't the weekend warriors. We were playing a sport that was highly strategic, and it is still today. If you look at tournament paintball, it's not people running around in the bush pretending to play militia. And we continuously had to struggle to try and position it, because, so for example, from a business perspective, it's really tough to invite a mom in to invest in the sport, because in South Africa, we had a challenge to actually get players of color to come play, first of all, and then also youngsters, because parents think like, why would I want to send my kid to a weekend game where he's learning how to shoot people and kill and use guns? So we've continuously tried to reposition it, and it was kind of an interesting space to play in, because, you know, that's why I think also got switched on to the idea of branding, because we had to brand ourselves continuously to try and get that story across. And I think that was one of the key things to remember, and it kind of fits in my mind. But then also from a business perspective, you know, one of the key things, and I don't know if this answers your question, is what I've learned is that maybe, you know, building a business around a passion is not always the best thing to do, because when your passion dwindles around that sport, for example, which happened to me. I mean, I still love the sport. I'll play tomorrow. I still have a whole garage full of gear that I cling onto like a crazy man, and trophies and stuff. But the passion to really push forward, because I've achieved what I wanted to achieve, then that kind of dwindles and I'm looking towards the next thing that I want to do. Then it's really hard to sustain that business because the two is connected.
If we dive deeper into design and switching gears now in that sense, so what is design for you in a broader perspective? And of course, then we go into more details.
So, I mean, and there, I mean, for people listening to this that are in the design field, they will probably see things a little bit differently, because I think it means different things for different people. I have kind of two aspects of that, which is kind of a balance of the two. Is that there is this aspect of creating things that are required, needed from a human-centric perspective. So it sounds such a cliche these days, but when I started back in the day, and this is kind of aligned a little bit with, because Joshua's always for me like the technology geek. I mean, where I stepped into advertising was really in the digital marketing space. It was like, but then back then it was talking about, so what is your digital marketing? Yes, we have a website. And Josh, you would love, like I worked in one of the original all gold websites. So I coded that thing, right? So that's like a tomato ketchup kind of brand in South Africa that's well known. And we looked at it from that perspective. But then what started happening is we started realizing that, you know, these are all built by technology people. We're not considering that users or people are using it. And there's two aspects. There's the usability aspect, how people actually flow through the website and find content. And then the other thing that's so key and still true today is like, why do people care about your website? What do they want there? What is the need that it's fulfilling? Why does it exist? That's the one side. And that was kind of a key focus area there from a design perspective. How do you kind of figure out how this works? And then the key word that I want to talk about later on is empathize with people to try and figure out what they need. But then what has become true for me now, and it used to be like the big thing, is what is the business perspective of this? Why does this thing exist from a business side? Because I think one thing that a lot of designers, especially, no, I'm not going to say that because I think it's young and old. I was about to be not very diverse and equity kind of minded because I wanted to say young. And that's also something I need to keep out of my mind because there's some brilliant business people that are much better than me and much younger than me, is that people do not always consider what is the business purpose of this website or this digital marketing campaign. You know, what is it supposed to achieve? And I think there's been a bit of a shift, like, yeah, let's latch onto blockchain. Let's do this. Let's, you know, I sit in so many meetings where people talk about virtual events, for example, VR, AR. I'm going, okay, so are you taking a piece of poo and putting a bow on it with VR? You know, what is that thing that you're actually trying to actually do, you know? And what is it going to mean from a business perspective? Because I'm very happy to talk about revenue. Because if I get revenue, it means I can grow my business, I can maybe hire people, and I can do more interesting things. So let's talk about how it makes money or brings value.
So Werner, I'm going to latch into a point that you mentioned there about business and what is it linked to business. And I think one of the concepts that I'm certainly fascinated with about design is the ability to see interconnections between different things. So how can we potentially use some of those learnings, and maybe you've got some ideas around this, is how could we change the way that we think about design to incorporate key business indicators and business outcomes rather than just producing things for the sake of?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, of course, there's a lot of things that complicate the ecosystem, right? In my mind. So, you know, I can't speak for you, but like when I started with user experience design, and this is very simplistic, I always try and make things very simple, else I get confused, right? And you kind of hone in on the wrong things. But there's a book, and I think people who are older as me, they'll remember it. It's called, they refer to it as the Polar Bear book. It's called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. It's one of the first big books that were written around user experience design, and we used to call it information architecture back in the day. And the book starts off where they have a Venn diagram. Now, anybody who's been in management consulting, and I think Jens also smiles a little bit, he's got a little bit in it when he hears Venn, because we like to have a good old Venn diagram. And we had, in the Venn diagram, they had this kind of 3 circles. The one was user needs, business objectives, and then back in the day, we had content, because there was like a key focus on what is the content we're going to drive. But content is not necessarily only about articles and stuff. Like if we think about the content we're creating here, it's actually value. It's like, what is that? I sometimes change content for context. So how do you get the two to overlap and connect, right? Because if I sell you something that you really, really need or want, need is actually better, of course, then I can be sustainable. And then, you know, we build this ecosystem. And that for me is how simple it is. However, I also understand that there's other complexities, and these complexities are growing by the day. So you consider technology that's involved, But then there's other softer things that I think is also super important. Something that I'm a complete noob with, but is starting to become more and more topical, is actually like, you know, circular economy. Like how are you building something that's sustainable? We just saw this week, I saw people talking about, and I think it's now passing in Europe, where we need and require the ability to actually fix our cell phones, you know, and other devices that we have, because we use them, we throw them out the window or ship them off to China or Africa, and then we get our new one. How can we create that in a sustainable way? And then the other thing that is a huge topic for me is like diversity. So when we create these businesses, who do we include? And more importantly, who are we excluding? And so I always try and like retain that little Venn diagram in the middle, and then consider what's the other elements that is coming into the ecosystem now that we need to focus on. And that's ever changing, or evolving is probably the better word.
So you mentioned empathizing. How does that play a role in that?
Yeah. So like, here's the story, right? So when, like, if you're in a design community and you move around and design a lot, and I think it was really probably true about 6 years ago, people latched onto this word of empathy. And there's two of them. There's empathy and then there's storytelling. And I really personally started to get a real, like, it's like when we speak about overused terms, at some stage I was actually sick of this damn term, because every second Medium article was about empathy. Everything is about empathy. The empathy map came out. It's actually one of my favorite tools, right? And people were just latching onto this word of empathy, which I thought was becoming so overused. And that's one of the terms that I personally started like trying to claim back, is the word empathy, because I think empathy is like the core, and it's really important in the world of design if you really understand it. And recently, actually, and I'm going to be a bit of a Joshua, because I mean, I also know Joshua outside the context of this show, is that I haven't read the book though, Joshua, because I'm still waiting for it to arrive. It's very new. The book is called Belonging, and it focuses around diversity, equity, and inclusion within the workplace. One of the authors is called Sue Uberman, and she's not necessarily a designer, but she was one of the first people that I felt really explained empathy in such an awesome, beautiful way. And the way that they talk about it is that, and I agree with this, and probably a lot of the listeners know that this is fact, is that empathy is not something that you can learn. You're not naturally, or you can learn it. It's not something that you naturally have as a human being, right? The thing that you naturally do have as a human being, if you're not crazy or twisted, is sympathy. Right? Sympathy is something easy. So for example, in a South African perspective, I sometimes think that we confuse empathy with sympathy. So, you know, and that happened to me, by the way, is that I always felt sorry for people who were living in the township, right? I'm going to go there and I'm going to save them. And I always tell the story that I did a design project long ago where we had to go into the township and we had to test it. It was actually internet kiosks by one of the big banks. So we were going to place these kiosks there, which was an awesome idea because it was giving people access to the internet that don't necessarily have access to the internet. And the boss that I worked for back then, a visionary guy, believed that internet access was, a human right? People should have access to the internet. And I remember we went there. So a classic thing with designers, you come up with ideas, you prototype it, and you push it out in the field. And we did these. We had an actual kiosk or two standing in the townships. And I'll never forget, I was standing at the door and we were actually there to observe how people were using it. So a few things about this story. Number one, it was the second time in my life, and this is now after being, it's probably 23, 24, the second time in my life that this white South African's been in a township, which is actually disgusting, right? The day before that, they actually took us on a tour. That was my first time. And I started seeing the community. I started seeing the actual people in the township. It's not this crazy kind of cesspool of craziness. People are building a life there. They have families, they have stories. It was actually amazingly eye-opening experience. But then the second time when I was standing in this kiosk, I remember this lady walking up to the kiosk, and I thought, okay, great. I was rubbing my hands together like a real shop owner. I'm going to now help her out. I'm going to show her how to use the internet. And Joshua, you'll know what I'm referring to. She was like this real squeezer coming up, like this mama, you know, and she's walking up and she kind of like brushed me aside. Like, I think she actually like kind of a little bit of elbow me out of the way. And I'll never forget. And I watch her and she walked up to the chair. She pulls out the chair, sits down, fires up Yahoo Mail for people who remember Yahoo Mail. And she starts working on a CV. She didn't need this like Mlungu to help her with the internet. And I observed her, but then like afterwards, when I went home and I started thinking about this experience, because I was blown away, like by this, like I was kind of like taken aback, and I thought like, why was I so shocked about this? And then I started realizing that I had built pictures in my mind about this lady and probably people like her. First of all, she was female. Perhaps in my mind, I thought, hey, because she's a woman, maybe she's not going to be as switched on. Because maybe her skin is not the same color as mine, she's not going to be able to use the internet, right? I'm going to teach her. And then also because she's in a different kind of area in South Africa, in a different probably economical situation, you know, I'm going to be the one to show her. And you know what, that day she taught me so much more than anybody's ever taught me in my whole life. And it made me realize something about myself. So that is why I think this empathy thing is so important. And just to riff a little bit on that, because I'm rambling on like a crazy man now again, is that what I since learned, and this is why I want to draw the parallel back to Sue Uberman's book, Belonging, is that she is this beautiful way of explaining it. So if you have sympathy without empathy, think about your cat. Your cat brings you a dead bird and goes like, hey, I love this dead bird. I really think you're going to love this bird too, right? So that's sympathy without empathy. And if you think about empathy without sympathy, think about Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, or potentially some of the people that you've worked with before, right? They have amazing empathy. They understand everything about your life, like how you feel, you know, what is your challenges, but they don't give a shit, right? They don't care at all, right? That is empathy without sympathy. So what we really need is like this balance. That's what they say in the book. So you have this balance of empathy and sympathy, and you connect them together, because ultimately people use this term about empathy is like, I want to see the world through their eyes. I want to walk in their shoes. And actually what you require is you need to see and understand how they feel in their shoes. You know what I'm saying? It's like you have to really try and understand. And that is really, really tough. And I think sometimes we take that for granted. And you know, it's something you have to train and learn. And that's one of the key things that I like to focus on when it comes to empathy and how it fits into the world of design.
If we take this, and as you know, we're about reverse mentorship and enabling people to understand how they can work between different generations. So how would you use this way of thinking to help and design engagement opportunities between young thinkers and experienced thinkers, as we call them?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a tough one for me, right? Because I'm still trying to, like, I'm really excited about this reverse mentorship thing, right? But now you must remember, I'm old school, or my perspective at the moment is like, how do I understand it, you know, the other way around, not the way that you guys doing it. So I think if I have to flip it around, like, and I'd like to hear what you say about it if I'm moving in the right direction, is that the thing that I would say and encourage is that, especially from the younger generation that you guys are working with, the mentors now, the reverse mentors, is that don't be shy about sharing your perspective and your points of view. Now, I don't know necessarily, because I don't know the young generation, and I'm also very careful to like put an umbrella around any generation, because sometimes I say Polish drivers are crazy. That's not like this. You can't say things like that. You can't say young generation, right? But I do think sometimes we feel like we have to kind of hide our real selves when we go into a situation where we want to share with generosity. And I think what I love to do, and sometimes it's so freaking annoying because I don't understand younger people sometimes, is like to really see the rawness of what those requirements, what is really important. You know, I know your holidays are really more important than my project. You know, I really know, you know, like that, I'm joking around, but like really like being clear about that, because I think that is where the reverse mentorship can really come through, because we're continuously trying to look at the world through our own lenses. And that's a paradigm that you can't really shift. You need someone else to help you shift that.
So I really love the story that you told, Werner, and thanks for that, using that example. And I think for those people who think about empathy, having that tangible touch point inside of a story like this is so important, because it actually shows you the human side of it. Because I think you're 100% right, and you referenced the Venn diagram earlier in the conversation in terms of how we sometimes given these frameworks and we then go and map them onto the world. And then rather than actually trying to understand the people inside of those situations that we're trying to connect with. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that I've certainly learned from using a design mindset in terms of willing to be open in terms of understanding and connecting with people. But I wanted to sort of double back to something that you mentioned around passion and sort of try to link a few things inside of this conversation. So you mentioned around passion and how sometimes your passion for a certain project might dwindle and you maybe feel a lack of drive or lack of motivation to drive inside of that space going forward. How can we sort of use an empathetic understanding to maybe reinvigorate that passion? So if you take a young thinker, for example, that is maybe less passionate about a specific project, but you ask them to connect with a way of empathy, and I love the way that you tied empathy and sympathy together. How can we maybe use an empathetic approach to re-engage passion?
Yeah, so I'm going to use another one, and really, like, this is something that I continuously also tell myself, right? Because and the whole passion thing is that I try and focus on, because I can get passionate about a lot of stuff, right? Like I have a whole room full of technology that I'm passionate about, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, right? But that's something that I do. My wife doesn't share any passion about that. It's like I'm just annoying her with all this stuff gathering dust. And to get back to your question, I think, you know, the connector between the two is purpose. Right. And I also saw that because I had this really awesome experience specifically in Deloitte Digital, where I got to work with a really young generation. We went out to really bring in young consultants, and I got to manage them and drive them crazy, and they drove me crazy. But the thing is, the one thing that we shared, you know, we didn't necessarily, because we worked on some really insane projects, right? Like we were building like an application for a big teleco provider that kind of killed all our souls in one go, right? It wasn't a great, like, it was a terrible project. Sorry to say this to anybody listening. It was horrible. But the one thing that kind of bound the team together is that we all had a common purpose. And that's the link, is purpose, right? And even in advertising, if we shared that common purpose as a young team, young, old, black, white, if we had a common purpose, you know, I feel then you can achieve most things. But the key is that everybody shares in that purpose. So for example, like using my example with paintball, because I'm jumping a bit around, but you know, the passion was paintball. But if the passion was building a sustainable business, I would have been able to continue, right? Or the purpose, like you need to latch onto what that purpose is. And then whatever is the passion on top of it is what it is. But the cool thing about purpose is that you can rally other people around you. Right? Because the paintball thing is like, I was personally passionate about paintball. Not all my friends around me shared that passion. But if I said to them, listen, Jens, like I didn't know Jens back then, but you know, I'm really excited about this business opportunity. I can make this scale, whatever. Jens doesn't care about paintball, but he's kind of interested in making, you know, a business scale or maybe turning it in a more innovative space, right? And now my other examples, like for example, in Deloitte Digital, we all had a purpose. We want to build a successful, sustainable team, right? We really latching, like we want to make an impact that matters. That was one of the big things we used in Deloitte, right? We want to make an impact with our team. And that's what all the youngsters, myself, everybody, we worked together on as a purpose. And then all the other things became easier. Yes, it was painful, some of these projects, but that common purpose was the glue, right? Because people can rally around the purpose.
So I really love that where you took that purpose example and things like that. And Werner, one of the things that I just want to latch on to here is you mentioned the second element around an overused term about being storytelling. And I think that you've really touched on that with great examples inside of that space. But I want to talk about how storytelling may potentially lead to a different level of understanding inside of the way that you interact with people.
Yeah.
And how you can go about doing that.
Yeah. So I'm currently doing a project with a high-end corporation, and I think that what happens a lot, and you could test it even in your teams and whatever, you know, when you speak to people, is that I think storytelling is the way that you can get people to understand, right? What your perspective is. So for example, when I try to explain to you empathy, I don't have all the scientific words and quotes and stuff. The only way that I can explain to you is by telling the story, and then hopefully we connect. And I think you always talk about the books by Harari, Joshua, is like he talks about how because everything is stories, right? Like if you think about it for real, I always joke about Deloitte, right? And hopefully they won't sue me for using the word, but it's a company, right? It's like we all believe in this thing, but it's a story because it is not real, right? But we all believe in the story. We kind of latch onto the story, and then we follow this brand and we do what we need to do. Advertising was even worse. We had old Lee Clow. Now, anybody who knows anything about advertising, Lee Clow is one of the guys who worked with Steve Jobs. And I remember like the agency will do its thing, and then like in a certain period of time, Lee Clow will come online on some kind of Zoom call or whatever, and he will tell stories and he will talk about the future of the agency and how we're going to be awesome and creative. And boy, it was like agency church, and the thing is, if you can tell beautiful stories that everybody latch onto, you don't have to give everybody a raise. Advertising, we worked our asses off. Sometimes when the sun comes up, I don't get extra pay. We just believed in the story. Right. So, and the challenge though, like, and I see this with my clients, is that it's really tough to tell a story when you have to tell someone else's story. Right. It's very easy to tell a story when you say, okay, cool, these are the system and processes that we have in mind. Right. And where the challenge comes in with design is now, okay, so Bob, you've built this great online experience or digital experience or e-commerce experience. Can you tell me the story of Susan, who's actually going through this experience? What does that look like? And then the wheels come off, right? Because we keep on falling back to process, and process is not story. Yeah. Process is just like step by step by step by step, how the systems talk to each other. It's not the story.
That's a great one. I really agree on the storytelling part, because it is inherited from our ancestors. Like they sat around the fire and told stories. That's how we evolved as humans as well, telling stories and using that. And I also agree. I've seen it in a lot of organizations where the founder is even not there anymore. It's dead or passed away. And the stories around how he built the company and how he told the stories going forward are still keeping that spirit.
Yeah.
Inside the business.
It's so powerful. And I think we need to have like, and this is a rule that I'm trying to instill for myself too, because I think sometimes, especially when you get older, and maybe as a reverse people, you can mention or talk about it, is that you think you're full of wisdom, but you're actually just full of shit, right? Because you've made so many mistakes or whatever, and you walk into a room and you say, thou shalt not do this, right? But actually, the only time you can do that is when you have a story to tell. Right. So if I say like innovation is the best thing in the world, you should be doing it. Okay. So Werner, tell me a story that kind of substantiate why you're saying that. Then I better have a damn story, because else you're just sucking it out your bum or you're quoting someone else's LinkedIn post. Right. So I think storytelling is a great way to keep it real. And that's why I also enjoy talking to you guys and other platforms, is because we get to share stories of where we screwed up, like the fuck up nights that we also talk about, where people talk about stories where they screwed up. Because aren't those amazing stories that you can learn from? But it also gives credibility, right? Don't do this because I've screwed it up.
And that's also, I mean, we discussed it before we started recording, that people are interested in people, not in a company. The company is just a shell of a lot of people inside. So people are interested in, hey, this is Werner, and I would like to learn from him. And I think that's taking a turn now, going into the last part of the podcast. It's also an opportunity for young thinkers on how they can use storytelling and this the empathy part and sympathy part for themselves in engaging with experienced thinkers, and the other way around.
Yeah, Jens, I think you just tapped onto a very important thing, because I mean, once again, this is not me trying to give anybody advice from the young generation, but I do think that the one challenge we do have, and I see it all the time, is that there's a frustration, right? Especially when I have younger teammates. I have colleagues that I'm working with now on my team that I had to bring in subcontractor that are way younger than me. And I can see when they work with me, they get frustrated because I have a certain way of doing things, right? I am open to change. Like I'm really like maybe a bit grumpy when I have to change, but I'm open to it, right? So, but the thing that I find hard is that sometimes that request for change is so hard, such a line that I don't want to do it this way. If you tell me a story around or substantiate or contextualize why you don't want to do it that way, or perhaps you've had an experience too that's valid, but you have to tell the story. And I think sometimes we feel like the stories we want to tell to people who are more experienced or older is maybe not relevant. But I'll tell you what, like if you tell a story about your experiences, I'll probably be like super blown away by it because the context is different and your experience is different. So I think that is a great like lead into what you're doing around like trying to latch the older generation into what's happening with what the younger generation can actually bring to the table. But you have to tell a story. Old people, we like stories.
And it's amazing sort of what you just did there. And I guess it's because you're a designer at heart, but you sort of provided a great segue to allow us to sort of change gears. And you've been very generous with your time today and told some awesome stories and really exposed some great gems for, I think, both experienced thinkers and young thinkers to really think about and to take away from the conversation. And something that we're sort of turning into a bit of a habit on the Reverse Mentor Lab is allowing our guests to leave a challenge for the listeners, whether it's a call to action or an inspiration. So I'll hand the mic over back to you and ask you to leave us with a challenge today.
I mean, I just feel like I haven't let go of the mic. I've spoken so much, like you had to like really drag it on my hands. Thanks, Joshua, for letting me sit here and talk my ass off. The thing I'm going to add, though, and this is something that I feel personally very passionate about, that I think is also missing out of the design space at the moment, is that because we have this really human-centered kind of approach to design, we sometimes really go deep into research. And the thing is, people, have conversations. Those are super important, because if you're designing anything, you're not talking to people, you're insane, right? Don't do it. But do not seek the answers in the research and conversations. Seek insights. I think sometimes I even step in a trap. I'm trying to find the answer to the design challenge in the research, in the conversations, in the guidance that I get from other people. But it's only about insight. And the reason this happens, right, is that if you're only looking for insight, it means you still have to design something. And what I'm saying is, like, you have to design something. And that scares the shit out of everybody. It still scares me today. Because when you design something, and this is the challenge, is to remember not to forget to put something of yourself into it, right? What is the value that you bring? And I'm really talking about physically designing something. And advertising, we were really proud of the moment that we stand up and say, listen, I think this is the concept I want to do. I'm basing it on this human truth, but I believe this is my big creative idea. And you have to take ownership of it. But the scary thing is that sometimes your big creative idea is really terrible. And people are going to tell you it's terrible, and it puts a big dent in your ego. You just need to go to the next one. And don't be scared to do that. Inject yourself in the project. Bring meaning to the project by your insights, own it. Own the design. That's my challenge.
Love that challenge. That's fantastic. So where can people follow you? How can people get hold of you?
So if I have to ask anybody to do anything for me, is like find me on YouTube. First of all, I have a YouTube channel. I have 5 people on there. My mom is also a follower. That means 4 people.
And the 2 of us. But
yeah, you guys are on there. Jokes aside, I'm trying to build a nice library of kind of design tools. I'm a geek when it comes to design tools. I mean, they're not a means to end, but they are tools that make the design process more interesting. So I tend to find them and I tend to review them. So you can find me on YouTube, follow me there. And then also I'm really, really active on LinkedIn. I not only stalk the 2 hosts here on LinkedIn, but I do live streams from time to time, talking to and speaking to interesting people. And who knows, you might be one of those interesting people. So I'm still looking for more guests and more people to connect. So those are 2 places. You can just find me there under my name, Werner Puchert. It's a very unique name and surname. You will track me down, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Werner, for your time. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast, as usual.
thank you for you guys. I'm now going to slowly hand back the microphone to Joshua, like unwillingly. Thank you so much for having me here, and good luck. I think what you guys are doing is really amazing. So keep on fighting the good fight.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening and joining us on the journey that is the Reverse Mentor Lab. If anything fascinated you in the discussion that we had today, you're welcome to set up a 15-minute coffee chat with us. Our emails are in the show notes, and you can also connect with us on our website, thexyzplayground.com.